What is up, conscious monkeys? Welcome back to another episode of Traveling to Consciousness. As always, you guessed it, I'm your host, Clayton Gutierez. In today's podcast episode, we are talking to the one, the only, Caroline Gutierez. Caroline is a dope and very beautiful soul. Before we get into describing who she is, I need to make a big shout out to David Lyon. I don't know why I just called you Dave there. David Lyon, if you don't know who he is, he was on the podcast before, episode 071. Incredible stories that he had. And I just really resonated with him. So whenever I saw Caroline pop up on his Instagram, a piece of me just said, okay, this is someone I need to reach out to. This is someone I need to connect with. This is someone who needs to come on the podcast. So who is Caroline? Who is she? She's a energy healer. She's an intuitive, and she guides people into abundance and to find their flow of life. Her pattern here is to show you how you can kind of alchemize and transform your energy to shift your patterns, to remove some blocks and anything that is holding you back from being less than present and full of peace. And it's kind of wrapped up in one of her favorite quotes, which she says a couple times on the podcast, which is that you are the medicine. And that might be a little triggering for people because we have been trained and conditioned by society to think that all the answers are outside of us. But we're going to discuss why that is not the case. So guys, this is a really powerful one. We talk about history with family, history with dealing with trauma, trying to help other people through their trauma. And at the end, towards the end, it'll probably be in part 3, which I'll talk about more in a second. We start talking about the different kinds of toxic energy around being a fuckboy, or what it's like in the sex industry with stripping, and how it may not be as empowering as this newest wave of feminism would have you believe. So we'll talk about that. Please, again, don't get triggered already. Listen to the podcast. Listen to what we have to say before jumping to conclusions. And with that being said, if you're listening to this in the future, maybe like a week or two after this was released, you will have access to all 3 parts of this interview. I am releasing it one part at a time, so hopefully you can enjoy that. This is going to be so much more beneficial for your mind, your body, your soul, so that you can take the first hour, you can integrate it, you can think about it, you can see what's going on, and then you can attack the second part, and then the third part. But at the same time, if you're listening to this back, you can very much so, you are welcome to listen to part 1, queue up part 2, and then queue up part 3, and listen into it in that fashion. So that will be an option for anyone who's listening to this after the fact. And I'm going to be dragging on at this point. So, guys, I love you. And without further ado, allow me to introduce you to Caroline Gutierez.
Traveling to Consciousness, exploring spiritual journeys to find answers in uncertainty.
It'd be good to separate the corporate crew from my life on Instagram. So Caroline Gutierrez Instagram, that's one last name. And then Rothschild is on LinkedIn. And that's my other last name.
Oh, Rothschild. Are you connected to like the whole Rothschild family then?
I always tell people the same thing. I'm like, if I was, then I wouldn't be here. I would be in my mansion.
You probably wouldn't be talking about spiritual concepts.
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe, I don't know. You're right. And yeah, but I kept it separate. But then like halfway through working at that company, I became like super yoga, and like there was nothing that needed to be kept separate. It's like what you see is what you get.
So you were very much like in the, what is that, like the software field? You were very much like in the software logic.
Yeah.
And then that kind of pivoted you into the spiritual realm, if you will.
Yeah. I was in like I'm like, it's a story, but I I left college in San Diego after I finished. I went back to San Francisco, where I'm from, and started working like in the nightlife industry and all of that, and making a lot of money, having a lot of freedom. And then I got kind of stuck there for a bit, and then I ended up breaking free, is what I call it, and going into corporate, which is funny because most people be like, wait, what? But I felt more freedom in corporate, more peace of mind. San Francisco, a lot of these companies treat their employees really well. It's not like the 9 to 5 you hate kind of thing. That's just everyone makes really good money. You have unlimited paid time off. It's a really good gig, and people are cruising if you're at a really good company. And the company I was at treated their employees really well. So I was there
Oh,
for
that's
like
good.
five years. Yeah.
Well, then what was your catalyst for leaving the corporate gig? Because I feel like a majority of people, well, I guess it's different for everybody, but like, what was your catalyst for getting out of the corporate world and having this spiritual pursuit?
Yeah. So I I backstory, I had my awakening halfway through that corporate job. So like a few years in to the 5 years, so 2020. So like halfway through my time there, I had my awakening. Right when I started that corporate job, I was having the awakening into the light. It's like I call it awakening to light, then awaken to dark, and then you awaken to your essence.
Mm.
And so when I first started there, I awakened to the light, and I was like wearing crystals and like all like spirituality, and we're all one, and it was just so beautiful. And then a couple years in, I had my dark night of the soul, spiritual awakening, really intense awakening. And then for the next 3 years after that, just 3 years ago, I was on the quest to find the answers to clear trauma, ancestral trauma, my own trauma, all the stuff. And then I got to a place a few months back where it was time for me to like now guide others through like what other guides were able to help me through my awakening. And I always knew I was going to be helping others. I always taught yoga. I did yoga retreats. I have those running and all of that. But I knew I wanted to guide people one on one. I just didn't know how it was going to happen. And I was still in my corporate job. And I was like, damn, okay, like it's like my time there is done. But like, how do I get out? I got paid really well, great setup, lots of work life balance. Just, it wasn't, I always emphasize this people, it wasn't like the corporate job you hate. Like, it just wasn't. So, like, if anything, that felt even harder to leave because it's like I call it golden handcuffs.
Yeah.
And like also like a big part of my identity was at that job. I was there for 5 years. A lot of people I met, and just all these parts of me that I had to grieve. And so I ended up hiring a business mentor, um, and it wasn't super businessy, but she was more of like a confidence coach and like also helped with some business strategy stuff. And it was just like super fun. Portal, I went in with her and I started like sharing more of my spiritual awakening story, and a lot of people started coming my way. And that kicked off my business, which is what I do now.
That's awesome.
And yeah.
Well, it's interesting too, because you kind of bring up this idea that I was recently exposed to. I was listening to Joe Rogan's podcast with Chris Williamson, and in it,
Mm-hmm.
Chris talked about this beta region paradox, which is what you highlighted, where if things are going just right, if everything's perfect in your life, there's no reason to change anything. If you're at that comfy 9 to 5, your bills are getting paid, it's those, you called it a golden handcuffs, where
Mm-hmm.
you don't push yourself out of that spot of complacency because it's comfy, it's easy, there's no struggle. So why even do it? But it sounds like with you, there was something that happened that triggered this, what you called a dark night of the soul. So what is a dark night of the soul, and like what happened for you with that?
Yeah. Um, yeah. And I agree with that part, those golden handcuffs. I have another story for you on another time I had the golden handcuffs. I'll share that shortly. But the dark night of the soul is a time where you go into a deep, deep, dark place in your life. Not everyone goes into that, but it's kind of like some people call it an existential crisis. Some people call it midlife or quarter life crisis, depending on where you're at. Some people just call it depression and anxiety. So whatever you want to call it, I call it dark night of the soul. And it's when you feel like so disconnected from just everything, everyone around you. It depends on each person's experience, but for mine, it was like all this trauma was coming up. I was experiencing heavy depression, anxiety, not the kind that you could like smoke a blunt or hit the bong and you're straight. It was like deeper than that. It was like to the point of suicidal ideation, which has really gave me insight into what this all is. And it's all trauma waking up in your body, manifesting as mental illness, quote unquote, right? And so we woke up to a lot of things in 2020. Many of us had our awakenings on these deeper levels. And so I went through this portal of, after a mushroom trip, I went to this portal of like, what are we all doing here and why are we all in so much pain? Because 2020, everyone was like, it was just a dark time. It was such a dark time for a lot. And I was like, why is everyone dying? Why is everyone sick? What do we feel? Like? I was just like so confused and I hadn't ever experienced anything like that. It was like, it was just so scary. I can't even explain how scary it was because it's like you have to be in it to really understand. But I started to get these dark thoughts, really dark thoughts, and like about like not being on Earth. And I was like, whoa, this is people who are like in really dark places, like it's like suicide ideation experience. Like, and I knew they weren't my thoughts, but I started to feel like they were mine because they wouldn't go away. And I said this in another podcast I did, but like this is an awakening. This was my awakening, and it was a really dark time, and my soul chose it. My soul chose it. This wasn't, oh, you could have, you could have done something different, or like maybe this wouldn't have happened. This had to happen for me to reach this state of consciousness. There's no reaching these new higher states of consciousness, like much higher states of consciousness without going through some sort of pain, sickness, illness, something like that, you know, that it's rare, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, I know, some people who may have, but most of the psychics, intuitives, mystics, like everyone I know, there was a point where it was like this dark night of the soul, this kind of turning point where you had to like find the answers within. And so that dark night of the soul was 2020 to 2021. And then I had a mentor that really helped me through it. I found her, and she helped me to clear a lot of the energy and trauma that was coming up. So the dark thoughts started to go away. The quote unquote mental illness, I thought it was becoming like schizophrenic, bipolar, all the things, like it all started to dissolve. Rashes I had in my body, like these, bloat I had in my like stomach, like all of these things started to dissolve as I cleared my energy, my trauma. And I was like, wait a minute, holy fuck, I am the medicine. Because forgot to mention this part, but I tried antidepressants because when you get to such a dark place, it's like it's so painful, and I was like, I can't go on another day. Like I need to try something, and antidepressants didn't work, microdose mushrooms didn't work, like weed stopped working. So I was like, oh fuck, like I'm like, what am I gonna do? And so then when I went on the quest and had the mentor and helped me clear some energy and did a lot of what I do now for others, yeah, I found that I'm my own medicine. And I was like, fuck, there's no way that I can't tell people about this shit because like everyone's reaching for something, and I'm like, there's no way. And like that's a big thing that started like my business now. It's funny I call it business, spiritual business, soul mission. Like what my soul is here to do is like show other people the way. And like I feel like it's kicked off so fast and been so quote unquote successful, not by the terms of like money or clients, more so just like soul fulfillment. But also so many people have been attracted to my just what I'm doing and like asking me for guidance because I feel like there's a lot of power in like your deepest like darkness and like sharing that. And if I was just like came on Instagram, I was like, hey everyone, like if you're going through spiritual awakening, like let me help you out. I'm sure people would want help, but I was like, hey y'all, like I was in like a suicidal ideation psychosis, like losing my fucking mind, and found my way through. Like, let me know if you want any guidance. you know?
Yeah, I do know. So this is something that I've always been playing around a lot with myself. And then especially whenever you start talking to other people who haven't experienced things that you're talking about, there is that feeling like, am I just hearing voices? Is this like a split
Mhm.
personality within me? So how did you come to a place in this journey where you realized that you were not being plagued by a mental illness such as schizophrenia,
Mhm.
mental bipolar disorder, or any of those things? How do you know that you're not actually crazy?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that, and I have been waiting to share these codes, this information with the world, but I didn't know at first. I thought I was losing my mind. I was like, well, I'm one of those people now who wants to leave Earth, or I'm, oh, you know what they say when you hit, I was like 27, 28 at the time I waking up. You know, what they say when right before you hit 30, the mental illness starts to come in, or because dad and mom had something, you have something, right? So I fell into the program and quote unquote matrix of um, being out of your power. It's just simple. It's like we're just programmed to be out of our power. You know, um, and you kind of have to fall so deep out of your power in order to find your power. And for a bit, I didn't. It's yeah, like during that time, it was getting like worse and worse and scarier and scarier, and the dark thoughts weren't going away like at all. And it was like I couldn't be around people. I was like, what the fuck's going on? And so I started to research like you are not your thoughts, and I started to read some things, and I was like, if these thoughts aren't mine, like why aren't they leaving my head? It wasn't just like sad thoughts or like a bunch of like intrusive thoughts of like I'm it was these thoughts were bone chilling thoughts, like scary, dark thoughts of like
Can you give us
hurting
some
my
examples?
hurting myself, like hurting others, and it was like that. And I was like, what the fuck is this? And it's like that's a big part of awakening for some people when your mind gets so loud, you can't escape it. And so it's like I was either going to have to leave Earth or I was going to have to figure it out. And so I started to realize that like it was an awakening as I was on the quest researching on like how you're not your thoughts, but I was like, well, how the fuck do I get rid of these then? Like I couldn't live another day with them. It was like just paralyzing for me. Um and then I started to like see on Instagram different spiritual accounts saying like the big awakening, like ascension symptoms. No, you're not going crazy. You're just having an awakening. And I'm like, wait a minute. Am I part of this wave of people in their awakenings right now? And I was like, wait. And there's like hundreds of comments on these pages like, oh my gosh, that's happened to me too. But like in my world, like not in the spiritual realms that I was tapping into, like everyone was normal. Everyone was having a great time. Everyone's like, what's wrong with you? Like, you
Mm.
going crazy? And I was like, yeah, I'm literally losing my fucking mind. Like, nobody understands. None of you understand. Like, my sisters at one point said, um, friends like, oh, is Caroline good? And my sisters were like, no, she's losing her fucking mind. We don't know what's going on with her. And I was like, oh my gosh, like it's happening to me. Like I'm going off the deep end. So I was researching and researching, and during that time, I was actually, this is an important part, I was being reflected back my own fears. So there was like one therapist I connected with, and she's like, maybe you're schizophrenic. And I was like, oh fuck, like maybe I am. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I don't know. There's something inside of me was like, this doesn't make sense. How is my power just outside of me? And like, how am I just out of path? And then another one was like, oh, take these antidepressants. And it was just like, all my fears are being reflected back to me because everyone's a reflection of your fears or your not fears. And then I was on YouTube and I found this woman who was my mentor for most of my awakening. And she was talking about exactly what I'm saying, these bone chilling thoughts. Feels like you're in a psychosis, you're out of touch with reality, you're in a deep, dark place, nobody understands. And I started working with her and I dropped the antidepressants that weren't working. I dropped all the therapists. These were therapists who had their like PhD and they had been doing it for 20 years, some spiritual ones. Nobody had been through what I was going through. And I knew it because they weren't able to guide me through it. And so when I met her, that's when I popped out of this hole of like, oh, I probably have a mental illness, and more of like, this isn't a mental illness. This is energy waking up my body, trauma that wants to be cleared so that I can awaken to new states of consciousness and feel at peace.
I mean, it's great that you got to this place of seeing that internal peace within you. How does this, because you're doing all this research, you're in this place where shit in your mind is just AWOL. Things are crazy. quite literally, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And you're finding all this information on depression, psychosis, medicine, whether that's drugs or yourself. And, you're not your thoughts. So what are they? How do I get rid of them? When you were coming across different information, whether it was m- m- historical, medical, physical drugs, or if it was spiritual, how did that information resonate with you? Did some of it resonate more? Did it resonate in different ways?
Like all the different information I was coming across. Yeah,
Yeah, like parsing out
spiritual.
whether the answer was in, prescription
Ooh,
drugs or in spirituality.
discernment. Yeah, discernment. That was the biggest lesson of my awakening. I love that you asked that because since that awakening, I really got compassion, deeper compassion for humans and, to each their own. Some people do take antidepressants during their awakening because whether they know they're going through an awakening or not, um, and others opt out. But like when you have no choice because it's like you can't go on with your life without some sort of equilibrium, then like then you got to do what you got to do, and you're still gonna like be good. But for me, um, I learned discernment through my journey, and like I started to get really in touch with my body, especially working with that mentor. It's a lot of the work I do now, like somatics, energy, quantum things to clear energy. And like I was so in touch with my body and sensations at that point that like I didn't have to think so much. My body would just contract if something wasn't for me, and I would feel relief if like it was for me. So when I'd hear information online about like, oh, like you can get a mental illness at age 28 and that's when they come on, and be careful, and this is how you are for the rest of your life. I'd feel this kind of like contraction in my body. I'm like, and like a part of me was like, that doesn't make, I just, I don't know. I was like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, and then, and then when I hear things like, oh, you're having spiritual awakening, this is just trauma wake up in your body. You can clear it. I was going through the same thing as you and I cleared it. And now I'm at this state of consciousness. I was like, ooh, I'm going to take that route. And like, especially because the people saying it were like, I went through this, you know what I mean? So, it's, that was a big part of it for me. And I just felt so held by the people in that kind of the spiritual realm, like so held and supported. And I didn't feel that way uh, with the like the psychiatrist realm, even though they had good intentions. Like everyone had really good intentions and wanted to help. Um, and yeah, I guess so. Really, just like listening to my body, discernment's huge during the awakening. And for anyone listening, like I would just say, like also like it's okay if you need to take something. It's okay if you don't want to. Like there's so much shame in people who take antidepressants or take things like, and like the reality is like nobody wants to do that. Like no, like it's just like whether people are microdosing or whatever their antidepressants, whatever people do sometimes for depression, like there are these different options or like it's people do it because they're not at a place of like peace and bliss and happiness, and your natural state is peace, bliss, and happiness. And when it's not there, then it's energy that we can clear and we can move and we can alchemize. And then you can get to this place of like peace. And so mental illness, like I just learned through like so much discernment and just my journey of like just researching and experiencing myself is just it's not what we've been taught or what we've been told. And like I said, everyone has good intentions. Like everyone does, like that is trying to help doctors, psychiatrists, everyone. They really do. Everyone just has different teachings that they've learned. And these are my teachings that I've learned.
Yeah, it's certainly powerful on realizing that everyone's operating from the information that they've accrued to this point in their life and
Mm-hmm.
doing, at least probably for the most part, I'm sure there's some nefarious actors out there, but for the most part, everyone's putting forth the best thing that they can offer. And so it sounds to me like you kind of had this smorgasbord, the buffet of treatments, if you will, and you kind of just started picking and choosing and sampling and saying, okay, let me try these ones, let me try those ones, and which ones are working out the best for me over time.
Yeah, which ones feel the best? Which ones put me in my power? Which ones take my power? Which ones take my power away from me? Which ones keep me victim? Which ones empower me? And anywhere where my power is going to be outside of me, I didn't feel resonant with. And also there was this part that's coming to mind right now where the antidepressants, like maybe they could have worked honestly if I stayed on this for more than a couple of weeks. Everyone's like, well, you know what you have to do, stay on for 6 to 8 weeks or whatever, and but for me, there was just this like, I don't know, like a soul, something in my soul, like a deep knowing that I can't mask what this is, or I'm never going to get through it. It was this like, I could alleviate it, right? I tried to take some Xanax here and there to like chill me out so I didn't lose my mind, but like the Xanax stopped working because my soul was like, Caroline, we chose for you to have this awakening so you could show other people that they are their own medicine, but you got to go through it. So I'm like, but yeah, it's just like a deep knowing and discernment. And like you said, like, yeah, everyone has their own truths. And I just try to be like a light and a pillar for my truth, and whoever's meant to tap into that. I see it like being a lighthouse for boats, and whoever's meant to tap into this frequency will gravitate towards me, and whoever my truth might trigger, because my truth will trigger those who are maybe are medications or are putting their power outside of their stuff in other ways. Like my truth will trigger them, but eventually they typically gravitate towards me, and I get that because I'd be triggered. I'd be triggered.
Mm.
When you show up in your power and you tell people that they're their own medicine, and your truth questions their entire belief system, that's an uncomfortable place to be. And I know it because I've been on the other side where I'm like, well, what the fuck is this person saying? Wait a minute. Is my whole belief system just, wait a minute. And then you kind of like push the information away because it's like, I can't see this truth. And like, this isn't true. And then eventually you kind of lighten up that wall you put up and you're like, wait a minute. She's in her power. Am I my own medicine too? And it's like, then they tap into the frequency.
So what you're saying is you've just triggered half of my audience, and now they're turning off the podcast.
Aw, and I say it with the most love. I actually have I have friends who are on antidepressants, and like they hear my story and learn from me, and like they're getting, towards points where they're going to wean off, and whether I show them the way or they find the way, and it's beautiful. But I'm definitely I'm careful to I want to always be in my truth. Like I'm always going to speak in my truth, but I also do have compassion and love for those who don't have my truth, and they don't have to. I always just say like, do what like feels most empowering for you and brings you into your power.
Mm.
And yeah.
Yeah, and it's really a crazy thing to get to that point. But I do want to take a step back to your Dark Night of the Soul, because I know with mine and majority of the ones that I've heard, there's usually a trigger. So like for me, mine got triggered because I did a psilocybin therapy session. I did it after a messy breakup. Didn't make sense to me. Shit was confusing. Did some psilocybin and showed me a lot of patterns that I was running at a unconscious in the matrix level. For you, was there a trigger? Was there something that triggered this whole chain of events to occur?
Yes. It was mushrooms.
Oh,
And
yes, we got another one in the club.
I'm I'm careful to say that, although I always want to speak on it.
Please use drugs responsibly, guys.
First of all, love LSD. Don't take it anymore, but used to take it my LSD chapter was age 20 to like 23. I'd take tons of LSD with a partner I had, DMT, all that fun stuff. And then my mushroom era began a few years after with a different partner I dated, where he was really into mushrooms. So we'd take these 4 gram trips and we'd trip out. And I wasn't at this level of consciousness in that yet. I was younger and just I wasn't as deep into my journey yet, but we take these big trips and we trip out. This was before like the microdosing era. So we just skipped microdosing. And I thought that I thought you just take 4 grams. Like that's what you do because that's what he was doing. So I was like, well, I'm just gonna do what he's doing. Cause you do what your partner does sometimes back then.
For those
So,
listening, that's considered a hero dose. So
yeah. So
do not, I mean, you can start there, but not
use a
recommended.
guide, like be with a guide. It's like, it can be so powerful when you have a guide, which I'm actually thinking about becoming a guide. But so we would take 4 grams and trip out and it was so much fun. And it was introspective, but I was younger and I could just like I was having a weird part of the trip. I could just kind of smoke some weed and continue on, and we'd see colors and we'd dance and it was fun. I didn't really face any shadows. I didn't really know what shadow work was, and nothing came up too heavy like it did in my awakening. So then, I a few years later, when I was 20, 27, 28 during my awakening, or 27, yeah, I did 1 gram of mushrooms. And the reason that I hesitate to tell people it was mushrooms sometimes because like I I know so many people take mushrooms now and I don't want people to think like, oh no, I'm gonna go into a psychosis if I take mushrooms. It's just what
Mm.
my soul chose because I was with a few other women, a couple of like close friends of mine at the time. The mushrooms we were taking were mushrooms that I had gotten from a friend and I always got them from the same person. And after that 1 gram, I went into the really, really, really dark place. Everything around me started to turn dark. It was all reflecting the trauma coming up within me. Internal was reflecting external. My friends are like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "No, I need to like go upstairs to this room and just be alone." And I was like, I started to lose my mind and I started to feel out of control. Couldn't couldn't be around like the kitchen or like knives or like anything. And it was like a dark fucking place. So yeah, it was mushrooms. Um, I it happened as exactly how it should have. And after that trip, I was like, that's when the awakening started. I remember it getting like just progressively worse and worse each day. I thought it was like good, it was a bad trip, but then it was like, oh fuck. And once I found my mentor, I started to integrate. And that's why for people taking these bigger doses, or even if a gram does this to someone, like integration. It's meant whatever comes up. There's no such thing as a bad trip or a good trip. Same with like your LSD trip. How did we get to where we're at now? Like how are we at this level of consciousness? It's like everything that happens is divinely happening, like divinely orchestrated for your awakening. There are no accidents. People are like, oh, you take like the wrong mushrooms or like maybe your environment. And I'm like, listen, like this shit had to happen. But for like a minute, like a couple weeks, I was like, oh my gosh, I took the wrong mushrooms. Oh no, I should have done the setting differently. Even though I was in like a beautiful house in Lake Tahoe, it was like the perfect setting. And I was like, maybe it was one of the people I was with, they triggered this. And yeah, it
Mm.
was just very victim consciousness, like putting again my power outside myself. So I was never going to heal at that point. But yeah, it was
I had
mushrooms.
there was a yoga retreat I went on, and one kid that was there, he had never done mushrooms before. And he was married, and we were like, hey, like, we're here. If you want to do them, you can try them out. He's like, oh, I don't know. Like, no pressure, but like, it's your choice. And so he ended up taking a little bit, probably in the same ballpark of like 1 gram, maybe 1.5, spaced out over some time. And, had a good time, enjoyed it. Some time passes and I go back out to San Diego to visit him and some other friends, and we're at a barbecue at his place. And subconsciously, I kind of noticed that his wife wasn't there, but I didn't ask any questions. And so somebody someone that was beside him, we started talking. He's asking about mushrooms. They introduced me like, oh, he has like a spiritual podcast. He talks about this stuff, he knows. So like, if you're thinking about it, talk to him, da, 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 da. So I started talking to his friend and I'm like, yeah, explain it to him. And I said kind of exactly what you said is there's no such thing as a good or bad trip. There's only the trip you're supposed to have.
Ooh.
Now, my buddy who was at the yoga retreat got flustered and walked away whenever I said that. And I noticed it. I was like,
Mm,
okay, that's interesting. So I start talking to him later, and he brings up that he's no longer with his wife. And I was like, oh, I kind of had a feeling, but I didn't want to say anything. And he's like, yeah,
mm,
that's why whenever you said that earlier about there's no such thing as a good or bad trip, I got triggered because it was on that trip that I realized I shouldn't have been with my wife. And that's when everything started shifting. And I was like, oh shit. And I was like, well, how are things now? And he's like, oh, I'm a lot happier, man. Like it
oh,
sucked going through it, but it was for the better. So I so it's something that I kind of needed to learn to be careful with, like kind of just throwing that out there because it's very much in my
mm,
mission to like, here's the truth. But sometimes, that comes across a little different depending on the person.
yeah. And I think it's the way also like going about the truth because sometimes when you wake up to the truth, you just like are on a roll. You're like, hey, there's like chemicals in all your shit, you guys. Like, you're all gonna get fucking sick. like, like, and when it's like in reality, like I was doing the same shit weeks before I had the awakening, right? So it's like, it's like having compassion for, I think earlier in this episode, you were like, just everyone's at their where they're at, and like everyone's doing the best for their state of awareness and consciousness. And we all just grow at different paces and together and whatnot and learn from each other. And we all have our things we awaken to. And yeah, that's how we learn from each other. But I notice in like how you were just saying, like, I was like, oh shit, like when I do speak my truth and like I'm conscious about being, as compassionate and just sweet in my truth as possible, but it's going to trigger people. It's going to. And that's okay because triggers are medicine too. Like you hear it all the time. Those what's the quote? It goes, uh, "I may trigger you or inspire you, and both are medicine or something." And
Hmm.
like I have kind of energy like that where it's like usually pretty laid back and just sweet, my truth, but like it's going to trigger someone, and that's okay. And eventually, those people who got triggered, they come around, and I know it because I've been on the other side. For instance, if if you're playing small and you're, in victim consciousness, and then someone's like, oh, hey, I learned how to do this. Like, actually, I'm feeling amazing and free. And you're not just saying it, like, you can feel their energy. They are free, they're blissed out. Then you're like, fuck, like, I want to get there, but fuck, I'm sure, fuck this. And you just turn away. And then eventually you'll turn back to the light and be like, okay, I'm ready. And so, like, in terms of even my soul mission, as I stepped into it and like started showing up online and started guiding people and gaining clients and just having a grand old fucking time, it triggered people who weren't stepping into their missions. And I know that because of some people would even tell me like the way I was showing up, it was showing up big and powerful and in my truth. And that'll trigger someone who knows their truth and isn't sharing it. And I know that because again, I've been on the other side where I'm like, fuck, I'm triggered because I haven't stepped in my soul mission. This person's in theirs. And then another part is like, I notice like as I step into my like sensuality and show up in my like full like sensual essence, that will trigger women who aren't in theirs. And again, I've
Hmm.
been on the other side where I see women like showing up and they're like just like their queen energy, they're like full like sensuality on Instagram. And I'm just like, when I wasn't doing that, I was just kind of like, fuck, like, why am I triggered right now? So I know how powerful triggers can be. And I think it's important for us to just continue to speak our truth, even if it makes people feel uncomfortable.
And that there's an interesting transition here, I think, into creating content online because
Mm,
kind of as a background for the listeners, you're probably the first person who I've had on that doesn't exactly have a huge Instagram presence, or at least hasn't created a whole
mm,
bunch of content, just because, big shout out to David Lyon all the way back from episode 72. I think he was on the podcast. Let me double check that real quick
I
to get
love
some
David.
people. He's the man. He's so cool. And I spelled David wrong. 71, episode 71 with David. And I I saw him post on your his Instagram, like a huge shout out to you. It's like, oh, this chick's like on the up and up, you know, da 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 da. And there was talking about energy. There was something about that post where I was like, you know, I trust David. David's always locked in, and so I was like, all right, let me check out this chick and see what's going on. And it was interesting because you haven't at this point at least created a lot of content online, so there wasn't too much for me to go through. And this brings me to the question, which is, knowing that you've experienced those triggers from other people who are in their power, do you find it difficult or have any fears related to posting things of your authentic self and triggering other people?
No. I feel like I don't really feel like I'm not like really a content creator. I've tried to go on like Canva and like make some quotes or like videos and stuff, but I speak a lot. I don't post my timeline a lot, but I speak a lot on my stories. Like when I get downloads, when I get messages, I just start sharing it. And I feel like there is a place where I could speak my truth a little more. Like there's some space there on like the secrets of the universe pretty much. And I think that's why I know I'll be speaking on that in my group container I have coming up. It'll be like this sacred place where like everyone taps into that frequency and like I unravel the secrets of the universe. But yeah, you're right. Like I haven't really posted much on my timeline. It hasn't been out of fear. It's just been out of like I've just been busy. Like, I've just been like working with my clients, like doing my thing. And it's funny you mentioned, yeah, like I don't have this big following, but I have a lot of people like reaching out and a lot of people coming to me, and it feels more like just the frequency. You know what I mean? It's like this frequency. But I thought that also, I was like, wow, like that'd be cool. Like to like, yeah, create some content, like make my Instagram like this person's. It looks so cool. They have like their brand going, and I'm like, it just was feeling forced for me to do it. So I mean, yeah, like I was confused too. I was like, how do I get so many clients and I don't have any posts on even what I do really? Like no one really knows, but it's just like I did a lot of free master classes and stuff. So that's kind of where I share everything.
So you think that's how the information got out there was? So do you feel like it's normally people you already know and you're just now sharing your truth more and it's attracting people you already know? Or is it people like me where a friend of a friend and then they find you?
I think it's both. People have been finding me at like a rapid rate. There's all these new people following me every day, and I'm like, where are they going to come from? And I'm like, I think the same thing. I'm like, that's cool. Like, because I have like maybe like 3 or 4K followers, but like but I also know how spirit works, and I'm like, spirit's just going to send the people my way who are meant to receive my medicine. You know what I mean? And yeah, it's a lot of people that have been in my field, and then a lot of just people that come out of nowhere. They're like, hey, I found your Instagram. And I'm like, oh, cool. Where'd you find it? They're like, I don't really know. I just found it. And it kind of reminds me of my mentor during my awakening. Oh, shit, that's wild. It's like a parallel. She only had like 1,000 Instagram followers. She was the most powerful energy healer I've ever experienced. No big following or anything. She was on YouTube. She had some videos. And I'm just like, I found like a needle in a haystack, like with her. And I was just like, yeah, she never really posted about what she did. She had like maybe a little website or something, just a few YouTube videos. And I found her, and that just shows like the right people will find you. Like the right people will. Yeah. And you'll feel it.
I find it so interesting, and a big reason I'm asking is because I've experienced above average success with social media. And I've noticed that there's people who maybe haven't experienced those same view numbers.
Yeah.
But it doesn't translate. And this was something that kind of broke my perception, is that it doesn't necessarily translate to money or other financial things, which was a real wake up call to me. And that's kind of just like a very, I don't know, fascinating thing that I've seen develop over time, where like your story's perfectly highlighting it, where it's not, you can, I guess what I'm trying to say is that having a large following or not having a large following is not an excuse for not doing what you need to do with other people or growing a business or attracting clientele.
Yeah, I agree with you so much there. Yeah, because if I was like, oh, well, I only have this many followers, maybe no one's going to hear what I'm saying, so I'm just not going to share. It's like you speak your truth to speak your truth. You don't speak it to get validation or wanting to feel enough, right? Which is, it's very common just for the human to be like that. We're, a lot of Instagram too is just like wanting to be validated and just wanting to be enough. And like, that's okay. And speak your truth, And so I love that you said that. I was having a conversation with my girlfriend last night. She has, um, like way more followers than me, like 3 times as many, I think. She's been doing her Instagram for a while and her spiritual business, but like our businesses are like doing the same. It's like it was never about the followers, but I do, I'm really inspired by people who do have like really like large audiences, and like that's beautiful that you like grow into that and like attracted that and like show up for that. You know what I mean? It's like when you're speaking to even a larger audience, speaking your truth, it's like, all right, we're really doing this. I'm curious how you got to that, you said above average success, like how that happened for you.
Well, there's a literal answer and there's a metaphysical answer.
I figured you're speaking my language, so spirit did it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I mean, spirit did all of this, right?
Spirit did
If you
all
want to
of
get that
it.
metaphysical.
Yeah, but for the humans to like, the humans
I
to
think
digest
it's I think there's something to the idea of, everyone talks about being in an abundance energy, which is true. Abundance energy is like this more metaphysical level, but I think that there's a underlying categories with underneath the abundance energy. So whether it's strong friendships or whether it's a large social media or whether it's money, we find that there's these sectors that I think we break out that abundance into. So you can have abundance, you can have that abundance energy within followers or the abundance energy within money. And there's something to the idea of aligning with that frequency of what makes a video viral.
Mm,
Like I could tell you energetically whenever I see a 10-second video or a 30-second, I could probably tell you within 10 seconds if a video is going to be viral or not, just based off the
mm,
energy within it. Versus now, if you ask me if an idea is like a $10 billion idea, I would be more difficult for me to determine that, if you will. So I think that
mm,
there's something to aligning with like the frequency of understanding what makes a video viral, what makes someone financially independent, and how all of that kind of breaks down.
I love that. So that's one of your intuitive gifts. You can,
I think so. I mean, I think I
yeah,
also,
you can
you kind of
feel
said
into your
it.
frequency.
Yeah, and I think I learned that because of something you said in your answer about getting validated, which was I think a big thing for, there were a lot of reasons that I started the podcast, but one that I didn't realize until maybe, I don't know, maybe it would have been 2 weeks ago. I was listening back to one of my podcasts and I was over explaining myself, and I'm sitting there, I'm thinking to myself like, why? It was episode 80 for those interested. Um, and it's a great podcast, but I just kept seeing myself like talking over myself, kind of like stumbling over my words. And I'm sitting there thinking like, why am I doing this? Like, just get to the point. I'm like, Clayton, what are you doing? Just get to the
Mm,
point. And what I kind
mhm,
of came to was like this feeling that I wasn't being heard, or that I was trying
mm,
to not necessarily get validation from the other person, but I wasn't being heard was like the cornerstone of
mhm,
it. And I was like, oh, it's like, yeah, like I'm putting all of these extra words in, thinking that it's going to somehow make me heard or more seen by the audience. When in
mm,
reality, I mean, you're just kind of stumbling over yourself and nobody really wants to hear it. And I think it's funny too,
Mm.
because recently I updated my whole setup, my whole podcast environment. So now I actually hear myself in my own headphones whenever I talk. And I think it's done something very profound, A, to my voice, B, to my calmness, and then C, for being heard, because I'm literally hearing myself. So it's like, okay, yeah, they are hearing my words because I can hear my words. And so I think there's a whole bunch of other stuff underneath there, but I do think that validation piece is coming through or came through because of, wanting to be heard. So I put my energetic
Mm.
frequency into content creation because it's like, oh, if a million people watch myself, then that validates me as a person.
Mm.
Reality had a whole different thing for me other than that.
Yeah. Wow. Wow, that's powerful. I love that you said that. And yeah, wow. I think also like yeah, like wanting to feel heard, wanting to feel seen. These are all like just our inner child. So it's like our higher self is straight L self. But like your higher self, yeah, knows that she or he's enough and all of that. Your inner child doesn't know that yet. So I tell also women, I'm like, who are trying to get out of like expired relationships or situationships, and like your higher self knows she's a bad bitch. Your inner child has no idea. There's a disconnect, and that's why you choose things that aren't your queen energy, you know. But yeah, I love that you mentioned that and said that. And as you were talking, and it sounds like you're really self-aware, and it's cool. Like I can feel that too in talking to you, and in all beings, as we're all shifting right now, it's like it's nice when you're, like you can feel so much presence, and I think that's what all humans like really are just wanting to just be able to connect in presence. And so, um, I notice with all beings, but also like a lot of men, it's like sometimes they have a hard time just like being just like fully just here. And like it's cool how you're just like here. You know what I mean? You're not there. You're this that or like it's just like we're just here. So yeah, it's really rad.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I really
Yeah,
appreciate that reflection.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a very, I've noticed how powerful it really is. And I think a huge, because I've always been kind of unknowingly empathetic of my entire
Mm,
life, of like feeling other people's energies, but not consciously aware of it. I was much more in like a logical, unhealthy, toxic, masculine energy for majority of my life.
mm-hmm.
And one of these big pivots, especially with becoming present and really
You are present.
I am presence. um and becoming connected to people is like, at least I needed to find this way to deviate and find a way to realize that it's this other person's energy as opposed to my own, and realizing
Mm-hmm.
that the energy I was taking on wasn't me, but it was them. I think that was a big pivot as well. And it could be a big reason that people unconsciously shy away from being present, is not wanting to feel the other person's energy, because it could create some fear that they'll take on that energy for themselves.
Well, yes. I actually have a story about that when I first had my awakening. Started to become really em-
Let's hear it.
empathic. I have to pee really quick, actually.
Oh, okay. Go for
That's just me.
it. Oh, while Carolyn is going, I don't know. Might make a mark here to cut this. Oh, but guys, go check out MushyLove. I have a discount code for 10% off Clayton. So go type that in, mushylove.com, or maybe it's Get Mushy Love. Go down to the link below, click the master link, scroll down to the bottom of the master link, click on support and codes, and go get Mushy Love, because it is by far the best mushroom drink that I have found and I have used. And we've also had one of the creators on in episode 41. So go check that out. Stay tuned, as in part 2, I talk with Caroline about astrology, family dynamics, veganism, birth control, inner child healing, and a lot more relationship advice.